Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Todd Nielsen with Clocktower Advisors, and you're watching Talk About Your Community. And this is a LinkedIn Live 3 times a week video show about community building, online communities, digital workplaces, offline communities and their relationship with online communities, or hybrid communities, if you want to call them that. The idea is to bring on as many different perspectives and ideas around community building using technology as a mediation platform as possible. And as such, I usually have a guest, but I don't today. Welcome to the Monday, August 9th broadcast. I am just flying solo today, so it might be a little bit shorter talk than usual unless we get some lively questions going in the chat. I hope that if you're able to join in, that you'll just say hello and introduce yourself. And if you have any kinds of current questions about online communities, I'm happy to entertain them. But I thought that I might touch on 2 things today. One of which is a topic that I had brought up on my Friday newsletter. I have a once a week Friday newsletter called A View from the Clock Tower. And in this one, I was talking about the idea of a golden thread in online communities. And that idea of a golden thread is, is there some element that carries through different communities of a certain type, whether it's a community of practice, a health support community, a hobby community, any of those kinds of things. Are there some common elements that are success factors in those communities? And how do you tell what they are? Because if you're in the process of starting up a brand new online community, there is that question of like, where do I start? I've got to do some research around some other communities that are maybe in the space. I want to make sure I'm not duplicating a community that's already there. And that whole process of building out a viable model for your community is contingent upon you making sure you're aware of what's out in the marketplace. So I had that whole idea of sort of the golden thread came up in a conversation with a new client that I'm working with, and it really kind of struck me. It caught my imagination, and I mentioned in the newsletter. I got thinking about like, what's the source of that whole idea of a golden thread? That notion that something is sort of weaving through, and it goes back to, I think, folklore and mythology. If you think about the Minotaur at the center of the maze, and Theseus, the hero, goes in to slay the Minotaur, but he's afraid of getting lost in the maze because it's this amazingly difficult maze that no one's ever gotten out of alive, probably mainly because there was a Minotaur there eating everybody, but also because it was just a very difficult maze. It was easy to kind of just get lost and never find your way out. So he ends up getting help from a woman by the name of Ariadne, who offers him a thread to go through the maze, and so that he can kind of trace his way back out again. Now that wasn't specifically listed as a golden thread, I don't think, but I think it's something that stands out in the imagination as sort of like, what is the way out of the labyrinth when you're going into a problem? What is the way that's going to lead you back out of that difficulty? And so that one kind of stuck with me. And then I think is also the idea of the story of Rumpelstiltskin, who could weave straw into gold, and he kind of makes a bargain out of that whole talent of his. I think that one's a little bit less arresting and doesn't really necessarily mean the idea of the golden thread or the thing that helps you weave your way through to a true path for your community setup. But anyways, sorry, it was just a little bit of a riff I've been thinking through, because I get curious about these kinds of expressions when they come up. But that whole idea of researching a community, I think, really kind of comes down to 2 things. What are the characteristics, qualities, configurations, or policies that are common to multiple communities? So like, what kind of general lessons can we draw when we're looking at those communities? And then are those decisions validated in some way by observable success? And I think what happens when we start to look at these online community setups and we start to do research, some of these communities are publicly accessible, some are not. So we're limited as far as how far we can see into some of them. And this happens to me a lot as a consultant. I'll have a customer say, well, hey, can you tell me some communities that are doing this really well? Well, maybe I can, at least on the surface. There are certain examples that have kind of been out there as amazingly great communities. Like Fitbit is an amazing community that's doing some terrific things, gets mentioned a lot. Sephora gets brought up as a community that does some really cool things. And I'm sure there are probably half a dozen others that are top of mind examples where they've really kind of built their business around community, that they've been able to successfully activate a group of members and really communicate the value of that and carry it forward. The Harley online community is another one that comes to mind, quite a bit. But how do you actually determine if you're looking at a successful community example, especially as you get to more narrow types of communities? What are the things that you can do to determine if you think that they are a good example or not? And this is something that's been on my mind, obviously, because of some recent client work, but it comes up, a pretty fair amount from day to day. So anyways, so some ideas for pulling out the golden thread from among some of these communities. So first of all, pay attention to any kind of statistics or success signals that the site itself publishes. These often appear on the homepage or on a sign-up landing page for the community. Things like how many members they have, if they've touted any kinds of successes, how many posts they have, what kind of metrics they share. There was a health support community that I worked with many years ago, and I talked. I tried to convince them to signal on their landing page if they could somehow get their members to indicate that being a part of that community in some way saved their life. And it was the sort of community that if there was a behavior change for those individuals, that it would have literally, when I was talking to some of the community members, they would say, "This site saved my life." I mean, how powerful is that? If you can publicize on a landing page, like when somebody is thinking of joining your community, that you can signal to say, "Hey, 3,000 people who participated in this site said that it saved their lives." I mean, how powerful is that? So I think it's an observable signal for success, like I was saying. But more often than not, you're going to see something about the number of active discussions that they've got, the number of members they have, some kinds of statistics like that, or even I would be more interested in knowing what their daily or monthly active members were, or the percentage of active people in the community. Because in a lot of cases, I don't expect that to be more than 10 to 20% are your really actives in a given community. But looking for those kinds of cues, looking for those kinds of things is important. Secondly, has the community done a good job of communicating its reasons behind certain design decisions? So in other words, why do we design the community in the way that we did? Did they offer a bit of an origin story and an about section for the community, or on the landing page for the community, did they talk about why it's structured in the way that it is? Is there some transparency around that? That suggests some conscious design. So it may not necessarily be an observable success factor, but I think that it indicates that there's been some real thinking that's gone into how that community's been put together. And provided that you can validate that community's been around for some years, that maybe suggests that it has been successful with that particular design decision over time. Also, is the community following practices laid out by top community industry thinkers or academic research? So there's been a lot of research around online communities. I still think we're just beginning to scratch the surface around what it is that makes online communities successful. There's been a lot of excellent research over the years from the Community Roundtable. I know CMX publishes things. Vanilla and Higher Logic do. A lot of the community platforms publish stats about their own communities that they host. And so there's some interesting data that comes out of that, but I still don't think we've necessarily come away with all of the big aha moments around what makes a community successful. So just some things to think about there, but there is a lot of good publicly accessible academic research that's available about communities. Community Roundtable data is by and large free to get at. That goes back over 10 years, I think. So some really powerful, good information that's in those places. Longevity of the community, as I mentioned, is a good indicator of whether it's done well. If it's made it around for more than a couple of years, chances are that it's doing something right. Some of the longer-lived sites that still thrive, that they enjoy a good reputation, they seem to be kept updated with a modern interface and user experience. They've probably made some good choices about how to appeal to members, especially if you're seeing some large numbers associated with it. How can you validate that independently? Well, you can make an educated guess about it. There are plenty of search engine optimization platforms and tools like SERPstat, SpyFu, Ubersuggest, many others that are out there, SEMrush. All of these, if you haven't heard them before, they're all platforms for optimizing your search engine results, and most of them offer some organic site traffic guesstimates based on how well they're doing with some of their keywords and how well they're showing up in platforms like Google and other search engines. I think that's it's something underutilized in our space, and if you want to get an idea of how well a given community platform is doing, try signing up for a freemium version for one of those platforms and plug in the domain name, for that platform, and see how it's done over the past few years. If you see traffic sort of gradually increasing over time, that's a really good sign that it's been successful. If you see traffic kind of, lots of ups and downs, it might be struggling, or it might be kind of in stasis. Or if you see it declining over time, obviously that means that maybe the community's not really catching on, or it's not doing great, or it hasn't managed to keep up with its investments or stay relevant to the members that were originally part of that community. And I think it goes to show that, that community management is hard. And yes, this is just looking at the domain name that a community may be living on. But I will say, in my experience, a lot of the organic traffic that you see to a website that has a community platform built into it, a lot of that traffic can be attributed to the community itself, because that's where all the user-generated content is. That's where all the activity is. That's what keeps bringing people back on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So I think those are some of the things that are worth looking at and thinking about. And then finally, don't be afraid to apply your personal experiences and hunches. I made a joke that I'm a huge Batman nerd, and so I always say, Batman says always trust your hunches. If you're getting a sense, that it looks like it's a successful site, that it's working well based on your experiences of looking at some other kinds of community sites in your research round, if they're standing out for you in some way, it's probably worth paying attention to that hunch. And then, these are all suggestions if you don't have direct access to that community site. In a lot of cases, these are public and open sites. They're not keeping you out. So you can actually go through the process of signing up for the site. And then you want to look at things internal to that community. Things like maybe understanding, what happens once I've signed on to the site. What kind of welcome email do I get? What does the experience look like when I first come in? Am I given a tour, an automated tour of the community? Is there a welcome video? Is there, some clear calls to action for me as a new member of that community? Do I know where to start posting? Am I invited to start posting somewhere? Can I see where some of the top posts are? These are all things that I would be looking for when I come into that new community platform to start taking a look around. So hopefully this gives you some ideas about finding the golden thread that you can apply to your community as you're building it out. And I realize this may be geared towards people that are maybe just beginners or just starting with it. If you're looking for help for this, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with you about your experiences in researching a community concept, because it is important that your community concept is fairly unique. If there's somebody that's already out there that's doing what you're thinking of doing, if they're doing it better and they're ahead of you, you probably don't want to enter that space. unless you got a really good idea to change things up to make it a little bit different. The other thing that I was reading this week, and I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking through this too. There's an academic paper that I came across recently. It looks like it was published in 2018, but I thought it was interesting because it was talking about social user types in online communities. So what are the user roles and contribution patterns in online communities? It's called a managerial perspective. It's by Ezgi Akar and Sona Mardikian. And it looks like maybe they're based out of, I'm guessing they're based out of Turkey, because that's the community that they looked at was based in Turkey. And basically what they did was they decided to take a look at online community builds through a variety of different lenses. So they study managerial and social domains, conducting social network analysis, and considered users' contribution patterns in an online community. Now, the community that they used was not one that I'm familiar with. It's based in Turkey, and it looks like it's comparable to like 4chan or something like that around here. So I don't put a lot of stock in that particular community, except that it's probably a large-scale community, like a very successful Reddit community, and they did a lot of statistical analysis around it, and actually they show. In the conclusion, they talk a little bit about some of the limitations of the study, and one of which was they really need more international looks at some of this stuff. And so it's definitely a weakness that they just looked at this one platform. It's probably one that they had easier access to and allowed them to do some of the analysis work. The other element is it sounds like it's a big discussion forum. And while that's great, it's not the only type of community platform that's out there today. In fact, it's an older community platform style, and there's others that look a lot more like a social media style experience. So, I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be a great broadly applicable set of findings. However, I tend to agree with the things that they came away with for some of the managerial implications. So they talk about spending time getting your viewers and your occasional contributors to become more regulars in the community, and so offering some kinds of rewards or incentives, preferably intrinsic rewards, for the members who generate a lot of content. I would maybe quibble with that and say the highest quality content might be what you really want to land on incentivizing, just to start attracting some of the more passive members and visitors to become more actual contributors to the site. They place a lot of emphasis on trust as an influential factor as far as how well a community gets adopted. I obviously agree with that. I've written about that fairly extensively and have some pieces on my blog about that on clocktoweradvisors.com. One that was interesting to me was they mentioned that playfulness can be an important point to increase participation of passive members and visitors. So providing features to increase playfulness and fun in the community, I think that gets missed an awful lot. And really interesting, point to make that even if you're dealing with some fairly serious topics, difficult topics, even some health type topics, I find that users will often congregate to where there's the most fun to be had, even if it's like a daily affirmation or sharing a fun GIF, something like that. There is a bit of a trade-off. Obviously, it affects the tone or the outcome of what that looks like. I've had somebody jump in on the statements here. So speaking of peer-reviewed research on digital communities, which places do you find the best papers published at? Are there any regularly published serials or academic conferences dedicated to these that you can recommend to me? That's a great question. I can only tell you where I go. As far as conferences that are dedicated to talking about community, I'm not personally aware. I would like to know that as well. I would suggest if there was anybody in the space that would have an idea of that, it would probably be Carrie Melissa Jones. I know she's engaged in some academic study at Marquette University in Milwaukee. And she may have some directions around that. I know she's very plugged into the literature. Where I go to find most of my work, I tend to look at academic publications that show up on what is it? It's the research site, researchgate.net. And I know that's sometimes looked at with a little bit of a jaundiced eye because it's often pre-publication kinds of pieces, but many of them are pieces that have been peer reviewed and put in journals. So I generally get my notifications of what's new and published in online communities through Google Alerts and Google Scholar. So I get really daily updates on digital workplaces and online communities through that. And then I usually go out and pick and choose, pretty carefully what articles really kind of stand out to me for academic research. And it's really hard to keep up with that stuff. And a lot of times all you can do is keep up with the abstract descriptions of what's coming out. But I find this a lot, like particularly with this piece that I'm mentioning, a really interesting piece. Clearly, a lot of hard work went into the statistical analysis that they did on this particular one. But the limitation of it, like, why did they just do the research in Turkey, and why did they limit themselves to just forums? I think there are some wider research opportunities that are out there, and so that when I say we're just kind of scratching the surface with online community research, we really are, and I think there's some important stuff going on in academic circles around that, and I think we need some better partnerships between those of us that are in online community as a practice and those who are in the academic realm. There's so much more opportunity for partnership that's out there that we just haven't taken advantage of yet. So great question. Thank you. I wish I had a slightly better answer for you. If I come across something, I will post it out to you and we'll put up a reply. Someone else posted up, does playfulness almost always equal gamification? Great question. Can playfulness be achieved without it? Yes, absolutely. So I worry about just sort of out of the box implementations of gamification, in communities. I mean, there are plenty of add-on platforms. Like I'm working with a client now that's using WordPress and using a WordPress gamification plugin to GamiPress, I think is what it is, to engage users within that platform. But I don't like implementing any gamification without having a good strategy that matches the culture of the kind of community that you want to set up. I've had it as such common feedback on so many communities that I've worked in from users, from members of those communities, that they didn't like gamification. They didn't like the badges and the points. They thought it cheapened what they were doing. They thought it kind of pulled away. So there is a kind of playfulness that I don't think necessarily serves, but I think there's playfulness that can be expressed in the design of the community platform and what it looks like. Does it look like a fun place to interact? Is the interface really interesting and good? Like when I think of forum platforms, for example, in those communities, and I look at the interface for something like Vanilla or Discourse, both of which are what I consider best of breed in the forum platform space. They're actually fun to post in. Like the actual process of seeing a preview of what you're doing in Discourse and being able to then publish it, or just the way that the user experience works. That can be fun. That can be playful. Or the ways in which calls to action are put together, or even the graphical and visual design of the community, can be playful in its approach. The community manager can set a tone of playfulness in the kinds of questions that they're using to facilitate, in the ways that they're approaching it. It all depends on the tone of the community that you're trying to set. And there are some very distinctive ways to think about setting tone in your online community, that it's often a lot more informal than it is on your corporate site if you're running it, for an organization. And so there are some really cool things you could do if your tone is irreverent and playful on the site that may encourage a different kind of interaction from your members. Of course, that needs to mirror what your members want and what they want to see. And then there's also encouraging the kinds of content contributions on the platform that are playful in nature. And so you could be dealing with a very serious topic, but that might mean that there's an even greater need to play in that space. And so that might be, as I think I was alluding to a little bit earlier, being able to offer sort of a daily affirmation or post a fun image or something to make other people laugh in a space that's maybe already all too serious, and because it's as serious as it is, that need for levity becomes more important within the community as well. So, really terrific question. I definitely appreciate that as well. So, anyways, then the name of that research again. That I was referring to for this is called User Roles and Contribution Patterns in Online Communities, a Managerial Perspective. It's by Akar, A-K-A-R, and Mardikyan, M-A-R-D-I-K-Y-A-N. And they clearly did some hard work on this. It's part of Sage Open as a research paper. So that was perhaps a conference, it looks like. And I could be wrong about that. But one of the things that I thought was very good about the paper, whether or not you agree with the findings or not, or understand the limitations of they had a pretty good literature review in here of the different kinds of approaches to user types in online communities. They've got this really interesting 2-page spread table that lists all the studies around different social users in a community, and then listing the user roles. And so by that, I mean things like, for example, they cite Bronzag and Helm, a piece from 2011, talking about their analysis of social networking sites, and they identify social users as sporadics, lurkers, socializers, debaters, actives, and answer person. And there's like this stunning list of different user types here. It's kind of interesting as you start thinking about the individuals that are in your community, it may help as you're sort of forming up the ideas of the personas of the different individuals who are joining and contributing within your space. So it actually gives you a pretty good tool set of different social user types that may or may not apply to the community that you're using. So one more question here from Craig Fleischer. Craig, thanks so much. This is fascinating. Thank you for joining. Thanks for your discussion of the Turkish context study. Please recognize limitations. Yeah, I mean, just because it's an academic study doesn't mean it's gospel truth. From what you said, I am looking for things that are peer reviewed. I am looking for things that have some level of rigor to them. And yeah, I always try to look at them with a bit of a jaundiced eye, and measure it against my own experience. I do think though, like I don't like to throw out something just because there's limitations to the study. To your point, Craig, you got to look at them a little carefully. But there's something good to be found. Like anything that's done with a level of rigor is important, and I definitely like to see what's out there and see what's available in the market. So anyways, I think I'm at my 30 minutes. I really thought I was going to go a little shorter than this, but it's been interesting to have some exchanges with you online here. Thanks for your comments. If you are joining for the first time and stuck with me till now, thank you so much. If I could trouble you, please click the like button and comment or share it with somebody that you think might find it interesting. This is a little bit of a one-off episode for me because it's just me chatting into the camera here and hoping there's some folks out there listening. So I'm gratified that there are a few people chose to join in today. Just wanted to give a quick update on my schedule this week. I'm not going to be doing a Friday episode. But I am going to be having my guest, Jenny Wagle from Jenny.community on Wednesday. She is phenomenal. And we're going to be talking a little bit about doing community roadshows within your organization to socialize the idea of an online community. It's going to be a really important episode. I'm looking forward to having her back. She'll be my second time guest on the show. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then I'm actually going to be out for some training on Friday, so I won't be on and won't be doing a stream. But then I will be back on Monday the 16th, and I'm going to have on who was supposed to be on today, but we had a little bit of a scheduling snafu. Friend and colleague Jeff Soxie, who is a local community builder, here where I live in this area in Wisconsin. We've collaborated on a number of different efforts, and I think it'll be fun to talk a little bit about our efforts to build things locally, but then the online component to that as well. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. One last comment from Craig here. Measured skepticism is warranted. Yes, smart approach. Good wishes and thanks for the comments today. Thank you, Craig. Really appreciate you jumping in and offering your thoughts and ideas, and the rest of you who've joined as well. Yes, I can't wait to hear from Jenny as well. She's amazing. In the meantime, we're off to a new week. I hope that you had a relaxing and productive weekend. I will be back on Wednesday. But if you've got something in the meantime, if you want to reach out, please reach out to me via LinkedIn, and I will see you again soon. In the meantime, be well, be safe, be happy, and I will see you Wednesday. Take care.